Imagine this. You land in a foreign country. You walk through the airport. You hand over your passport. The officer checks it, stamps it, hands your documents back. Everything seems normal. Until minutes later, several people come back for you. They ask you to come with them. They tell you there's a problem. Not with your papers, not with your identity. The problem is that, according to them, your country doesn't exist. And the most unsettling part isn't that. The unsettling part is that you know it does. Today, we're not going to tell you the story of the traveler from Taured the way it's always told. Today, we're going to do something different. We're going to look at everything no one wanted to see. Because when we do, this story stops feeling like science fiction and starts feeling like something much more uncomfortable. Stay until the end because there's a key detail that almost never gets mentioned, and it completely changes the case. There isn't a single official document contemporary to the events that confirms this story happened the way it's told. So the question isn't, where did the traveler come from? The real question is, when did this story actually begin? Here's the story in its most well-known version. In the early 1950s, a man arrives at an airport in Japan. Some say Tokyo, others say Haneda, others don't even specify. He presents a European passport. The issuing country is Taured. The officers don't recognize it. They check maps. Taured doesn't appear. The man seems shocked, annoyed, confused by their confusion. He points to the map and says his country is located between France and Spain. He claims Taured has existed for more than 1,000 years, that he's traveled many times, that he's never had this problem before. Given how strange the case is, the authorities decide to detain him. They put him in a hotel, supposedly under surveillance. The next morning, the man is gone. No forced doors, no explanation, no trace. And ever since the story gets repeated with a quick conclusion, he was an interdimensional traveler. But here's the first serious problem. That conclusion comes way too early. Before we continue, there's something we have to do. Stop. Because there's a detail almost no one questions the first time they hear the story. The story of the traveler from Taured is too perfect. It has every exact ingredient. A country that doesn't exist, an international airport, confused authorities, a hotel, an unexplained disappearance. Nothing extra, nothing missing. And that by itself is suspicious. Real stories don't get told like that. Real stories are messy. They have contradictions. They have names people forget, dates that don't match, versions that collide with each other. But this one doesn't. This one flows like a script. Now think about this calmly. If something like this had really happened, wouldn't there be different versions? Wouldn't witnesses remember things differently? Wouldn't the story contain mistakes? And yet for decades, the traveler from Taured gets repeated almost word for word. That forces an uncomfortable question. Are we hearing a fact, or are we hearing a story that got polished over time? Because there's a big difference between a real experience and a narrative refined to be remembered. And here's something even more unsettling. The stories that survive for decades aren't always the truest. They're the most tellable. The ones that create awe. The ones that don't demand verification. The ones that become impossible to confirm. And when a story reaches that point, it doesn't need proof anymore. It only needs repetition. Hold on to that idea because now we're going to talk about the documents. A line gets repeated like it's definitive proof. His documents looked authentic, but almost no one stops to ask what that actually means. In the 1950s, there were no international databases. There was no digital verification. There were no instant cross-country checks. Everything depended on printed lists, diplomatic recognition, the officer's experience. A document could look authentic for many reasons. Correct paper, real stamps, official-looking typography, the right language. But here's the key detail. A document can look authentic and still be impossible to verify. And if it isn't verifiable, the system doesn't know what to do with it. Now think about this calmly. If Japan didn't officially recognize Taured as a sovereign state, then it didn't matter how real the passport looked. There was no fast way to confirm it. Would you trust a document just because it looks real, even if no one can verify it? Here we step into one of the most ignored parts of the case, the traveler's psychology. According to the story, he doesn't panic, he doesn't beg, he doesn't emotionally collapse. He's irritated, offended, almost indignant. That detail matters. Someone who believes they've crossed dimensions, finds themselves in an unknown reality, discovers their country doesn't exist, wouldn't react like that. They'd react with fear, with desperation, with extreme confusion. But this man acts like someone who knows the mistake isn't his, trusts the situation will be cleared up, expects the system to correct something. That doesn't describe a traveler lost in the multiverse. It describes someone who is certain about his identity and his world. Uncomfortable question. Have you ever wondered why he never asked for help, only for explanations? There's something that rarely gets discussed when we talk about this case, and it's this. Bureaucratic systems aren't designed to find the truth. They're designed to classify, accept, reject, approve, deny, nothing more. When something shows up that doesn't fit their categories, the system doesn't investigate. The system protects itself. And that completely changes how we should interpret this story. Imagine for a moment the officials standing in front of this traveler. They weren't thinking, what if he's from another dimension? They were thinking, where do we put him? Because there wasn't a box for unknown country. There wasn't a protocol for unrecognized identity. There wasn't a middle option. And when a system can't classify something, it does one of two things. Either it rejects it, or it erases it. Now ask yourself something important. How many times in history was something never recorded? Not because it was impossible, but because it was inconvenient. Because admitting an error happened means taking responsibility, leaving evidence, acknowledging a failure. And many times, it's easier for something to simply vanish from the record. Not the person, the record. Keep that in mind because now, we're going to talk about the map. Another huge gap in the story. We're never told what language the traveler spoke. From a narrative standpoint, that's a serious omission, because if this were truly extraordinary, that detail would be central. And yet, we're told he communicated without problems, that he answered complex questions, that he understood immigration procedures, which implies fluency in European languages, knowledge of administrative terminology, familiarity with international travel. Logical question. Why would a supposed traveler from another reality speak the exact same languages we do? This points to a far more grounded possibility. He didn't come from another world. He came from another historical or political context. Taured, according to the story, was located between France and Spain. Right there, a small country actually exists, one that for decades was ignored, misunderstood, and misrepresented. Andorra. In the 1950s, it wasn't commonly shown on international maps. Its political status was confusing. It didn't have traditional embassies. Now ask yourself something very simple. What if Taured wasn't a country that didn't exist, but a name we no longer use? Transliteration errors, alternate names, archaic designations. The story never explores this option, because it would destroy the interdimensional mystery. Question for the comments. How many old country names do you know that no longer appear on modern maps? Sometimes reality doesn't disappear. It just changes its name. This is the weakest point in the entire story. It claims that he was placed in a hotel under surveillance, guarded by authorities. But it never mentions the hotel's name, the room number, a police report, who was responsible for the custody. In Japan, even in the 1950s, detentions left records. Hotels registered guests. Disappearances were investigated. And yet, there isn't a single official document to back up this part, which forces us to consider something unsettling. What if he was never truly detained? What if he was only held for a few hours and then released? What if the hotel is a detail added later to the story? Because real events leave paperwork, legends leave gaps. Another detail almost no one mentions, the story doesn't appear in newspapers from the time. No headlines, no official notes, no public records. The account only starts circulating, years later, in mystery books, in compilations of strange cases. That changes everything. Because now we're not analyzing an event, We're analyzing the birth of a narrative. Direct question. Would you trust a news story today if it only showed up years later with no original sources? Every time this case is framed as paranormal, no one looks for documents. No one demands proof. No one checks historical archives. The mystery becomes untouchable. But if we see it as a bureaucratic error, a bad translation, a story exaggerated over time, then it stops being comfortable. And here's the most important question in the entire video. What's more unsettling? A traveler from another universe, or a system that never admitted its mistake? Before we close, there's one last layer we need to look at. Why is this story still circulating today? Why, after so many decades, are we still talking about the traveler from Taured? The answer has nothing to do with dimensions. It has to do with identity. We live in a world where everything is validated by systems. Everything exists only if it's recorded. Everything becomes real only if it shows up in a database. This story unsettles us because it raises a dangerous idea. What if the system is wrong, and you aren't? What if one day they tell you your identity doesn't exist, that your origin isn't found, that your history isn't recorded? The traveler from Taured doesn't scare us because he came from another world. He scares us because he represents something very current, the possibility that reality depends on who validates it. And maybe that's why this story never dies, because it isn't about a man, it's about us. Today, I'm not going to tell you the traveler from Taured came from another dimension, but I'm also not going to tell you it's all a lie, because the real mystery isn't where that man came from. It's why no one ever tried to verify it with rigor. And now I'll leave you with this final question. If tomorrow a system told you your identity doesn't exist, would you trust your own experience or what a file says? Drop your answer in the comments, because this case stays alive not because of answers, but because of the questions no one wants to ask.